How much is child support in Australia? Honestly, that's a bit like asking, how long is a piece of string? It depends, but I can give you solid guidance based on the incomes and care levels of the parents. In Australia, child support can be anything from zero right up to around $61,000 a year. I'm Dr. Andrew Lancaster, and I've been helping parents with child support questions since 2017. Stay with me and I'll walk you through what child support looks like at different income levels, why the amounts vary so much, and how to manage your finances within the rules of the system. Child support is calculated using a formula where the payer's income is a major factor, to say the least. People are often surprised to learn the amount isn't really tied to the cost of living. It's not based on some assumption about how much would be reasonable. It's mostly based on the capacity of the payer to pay. In practice, it works a lot like income tax. The more you earn, the more you pay. Let me show you by running through a quick example. Suppose Brian and Stacey have a little girl or boy who is still under 13 years of age. That matters because the amount paid goes up once a child turns 13. Let's also say Stacey has 100% care. If Brian earns almost nothing or reports zero income, he will still be required to pay $1,720 per year or $143 each month. That amount is known as the minimum annual rate. It applies when the payer is on a low income and has fewer than 5 nights of care per fortnight. It's basically the baseline amount the system expects a parent to contribute when they're not the primary carer. Now let's look at what happens once Brian starts earning a normal income. Remember, this is for one child under 13, with Stacey on zero income, Brian on 0 nights, and the standard formula. If Brian earns $50,000 a year, child support comes out to $3,661 per year, which is about $305 per month. At $100,000, the assessment rises to $11,584 per year, or $965 per month. At $150,000, it increases to $18,000 per year, or $1,500 per month. At $200,000, Brian pays $23,108 per year, which is $1,926 per month. And when he earns $250,000, he hits the top of the formula. The amount is $26,044 per year, or $2,170 per month. That is effectively the maximum for a young child. There's a cap on combined parental income. Once you reach $223,808, any income above that doesn't increase child support further. By the way, if you want to check what your child support would be, we have the best calculator in Australia for simple cases at childsupportaustralia.com. Enter the incomes and care levels and it will instantly show the correct amount. It's quick, accurate, and uses the official formula. We haven't talked much about the receiver's income yet, and this is quite interesting. It would be good if more people knew what I'm about to show you. Let's lock Brian in at $100,000 of income with 0 nights of care and see what happens as Stacey's income rises. Stacey is the primary carer again, looking after her young child full-time. When Stacey earns nothing, Brian pays $11,584. If she earns $50,000, the amount barely moves. It comes down slightly to $11,230. When Stacey earns $100,000, Brian's contribution falls a little more to $10,143. At $150,000, it drops to $9,108. At $200,000, there is another small step down to $7,553. And when Stacey earns $250,000, Brian's contribution is $6,251. The pattern here is important. When one parent dominates care, the income of the primary carer does not dramatically change the assessment. As Stacey earns more, the formula expects her to put in a bigger share of the overall funds toward raising the child, but because she gets full credit for the spending being done, she is essentially funding herself. The way the formula works, most of her extra contributions loop straight back to her, and the assessment changes little. It would be a different story if care were being shared between the two parents. Everyone should be quite relaxed about the income of a parent who dominates care. Whether they work or not makes little difference to the assessment. Stacey can work without being financially penalized, or she can stay at home without affecting Brian very much. Now let's look at how family size and age affects the assessment. More children increases payments, but perhaps by less than you'd expect. Based on the incomes of the parents, we'll assume the baseline level of child support is $10,000 a year for one child under 13. If that child is instead a teenager, the assessment jumps to just under $14,000. A teen can cost up to about 40% more than a younger child under the formula. With 2 young children, the amount rises only slightly to just over $14,000, so 2 young kids cost only a little more than 1 teen. With 1 young child and 1 teen, the assessment increases to almost $16,000. With 2 teens, it reaches about $17,500. If there are 3 young children, child support is just over $16,000 per year, which is actually lower than the amount for 2 teens. For cases having 3 children of mixed ages, the figure is just under $18,000. With 3 teens, the assessment reaches its highest point, just over $19,000. Adding a 4th child usually has no impact the way the formula was designed. Note that however big the family is, the amount of child support paid never reaches double the cost of 1 young child. As I mentioned earlier, child support is like income tax rather than being based on actual living costs. How much time children spend with each parent is a major factor in child support calculations. Let's see exactly how it works under the curious system we have in Australia. Again, we'll start with a baseline where Stacey has sole care of a young child. We'll assume Brian and Stacey have the same income at just under $100,000, so the initial amount of child support is $10,000 per year. With 0 nights of care, Brian pays the full $10,000. If Brian has 1 night per fortnight, the assessment stays exactly the same, still $10,000. There is no credit for that first night. When Brian moves to 2 nights per fortnight, the first major change appears. Child support drops to $5,200, almost a 50% reduction. At 3 nights and 4 nights per fortnight, even though Brian is getting more time with his child and moving closer to shared care, the assessment does not change. He still pays $5,200 annually. At 5 nights, the amount decreases only slightly to $5,000. At 6 nights per fortnight, there is another significant reduction as the arrangement becomes close to equal care. Child support falls to $2,200. At 7 nights each, which is 50-50 custody, the assessment becomes 0. Because their incomes are exactly the same, neither parent pays the other anything. They have the same financial means and are given equal credit for spending on their child. This jagged and irregular relationship between care percentages and the credit given for parenting time creates financial incentives to play games with custody, but there are some positive aspects worth noting. There is no financial incentive to prefer sole care over the other parent getting 1 night a fortnight with their child. And for the primary carer, having the child spend 3, 4, or 5 nights per fortnight with the other parent is financially better than limiting care to just 2 nights. Child support assessments in Australia are very sensitive to the payer's income. To show how this works in a realistic scenario, let's look at 3 different income levels for Brian. Stacey earns $50,000, they have 1 young child and 1 teen, and Brian has 5 nights of care per fortnight. At an income of $150,000, Brian's annual child support is $20,794. If Brian's income falls to $100,000, the assessment drops to $12,444. That's a saving of more than $8,000 in child support alone, before even counting the tax he no longer pays. If Brian earns $50,000, his assessment falls again to $2,853. Compared with the original figure, that's a reduction of almost $18,000 on top of a very large reduction in tax. These figures highlight how strongly the formula responds to the payer's income. Even in a balanced care arrangement, the payer's earnings remain the biggest driver of how much child support is paid each year.